Ross Barnett was different from pretty much any body of water that I've ever fished before. The river and the lake itself were quite a bit different.
He said all the time that the Classic is the tournament to win. The Classic is the Super Bowl of bass fishing.
See, I had the feeling, whether it was true or not, that everybody was scared of me at that point. I believed that nobody was better than me.
Most people, when they leave, they don't come back. But he came back and done well.
Kind of got the fire back in my belly. I said, if we're going to go out there, we're going to go out there to do one thing, and we're going to win.
And boy, I'm telling you, you've never seen such a ferocious strike in your life. This fish just grabbed that spoon, water went everywhere, it sounded like he's flushing the commode.
That night he got all smash-faced, and then the second day, hell, he couldn't even, I don't think he could stand in the boat.
I mean, any time that you've got a shot, and you know you've got an honest shot going into the final day, yeah, the butterflies are running.
The thing I remember most about Ross Barnett is the reputation that the lake had before we went there, but it turned out to be one of the most exciting classics that we had seen up to that point.
We didn't know where we was going after we qualified for the Classic. We got a phone call from Harold Sharp saying it was going to be at Ross Barnett in Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi? Down on Ross Barnett Reservoir? Oh my goodness.
It's kind of like the return to Mecca as far as Ross Barnett. It was in Jackson, Mississippi where Ray Scott had the rainstorm and a rainstorm back in '67 when he got the idea of why not a professional bass fishing circuit.
Ross Barnett is one of the best lakes that we ever went on in the early days. At one tournament there, I caught 96-pounder bass and was in third place.
I remember Pete Henson catching like 105 pounds in 3 days, or 115 pounds. It was a heck of a catch sitting in one spot, tied up to one stump. Because then the lake kind of died.
It just went flat. For some reason, it just silted in because the river ran so red mud that all the ledges silted in and then everybody just said it just turned into the Dead Sea.
I would never categorize it as that, but it was in its decline. There was no doubt about it. But like all lakes go into their declines when they get older, and definitely it was in the decline, but the Dead Sea would be, I think, a little bit harsh.
The first time I walked out on the boat dock at Ross Barnett, and I looked down in the water, and I went, oh my God, it looked just like chocolate milk. And I asked the guy on the boat dock, I said, is this water always this color? He goes, oh no, it gets muddy in the springtime. I went, oh, we're really in trouble now.
The thing I remember most about Ross Barnett is the reputation that the lake had before we went there, but it turned out to be one of the most exciting classics that we had seen up to that point.
That is a very confusing lake in those days of just getting around maneuvering because of the timber, the sandbars are in the upper end of it. There were not a whole lot of marking back then. They marked the main channel, but when you get out of the main channel, it was tough just to get around.
That morning we started out and we headed up the lake and there was a bridge. Well, out there in front was a flat about 6 inches deep.
Several run out of the channel trying to cut a corner to get ahead of the other guy.
You know, everybody run through the bridge and just going straight, boom, they hit ground.
You can see mud flying up in the air from several boats down there.
We had a good time at Jackson. Of course, I had a good time at every classic I ever went to. I've never found a place to fish that I didn't like totally.
We had a good crowd of folks there. They laid out the red carpet to us.
I remember when we got there the first night, we got on a bus and went through downtown Jackson, Mississippi at 65 miles an hour in the city. and we pull up to the governor's mansion, and he was a true politician because everybody that would come in, you know, it didn't make no difference if you had the ugliest wife in the world or you had the best looking wife in the world. Every one of them to him was the best looking.
One of the major topics of conversation during that classic, and certainly leading up to it, was whether or not Rick CLUNN could win his third in a row.
See, I had the feeling whether it was true or not that everybody was scared of me at that point.
Competitive fishing, like other sports, there's guys get in a streak. I'm sure a lot of it's confidence.
And confidence is the most powerful thing a fisherman can develop in his fishing. I believe that nobody was better than him.
He said all the time that the Classic is the tournament to win. In his opinion, he thinks that's the most important tournament of the year, which everybody else does too. I mean, the Classic is the Super Bowl of bass fishing.
One of the major topics of conversation during that classic, and certainly leading up to it, was whether or not Rick CLUNN could win his third in a row.
Deep down, we hoped he wouldn't, because it was time for somebody else to win.
He had won so dramatically at Lake Guntersville in '76. Then he had squeaked by in '77 at Lake Toho. And now here he was, you know, poised on the chance to do something that was absolutely, totally unheard of in the sport.
But that was the talk, and that's what the press was looking for. But and he had a very good chance of doing that.
It was a lot of pressure on Rick. Everybody was, you know, you think you're going to win the Classic, and every time we'd have a press conference, Rick CLUNN was there.
It was conversation that really had a strong basis because of the type of fishing that was expected to take place at Ross Barnett.
That was right down Rick CLUNN's alley. Lily pads and moving baits. That was, back in the early days, Ricky was more noted for throwing jump baits to me. And when I say jump baits, I mean just slinging and winding, slinging and winding.
Power fishing, spinner baits and shallow water, things like that CLUNN excels in.
When you look at someone like Rick CLUNN that's had such great success in tournaments, you're going to have to pick one against the field in a Classic. Rick CLUNN's a good choice. There's no doubt about that.
See, I had the feeling whether it was true or not that everybody was scared of me at that point. The one or two exceptions to that were probably the boys that have won it before, like Bobby Murray.
Oh, big hand for our new champion, our first champion of the Bassmaster Classic 1971, Bobby Murray.
Bobby was the one that made all of us fall in love with the Bassmaster Classic.
We didn't know what it was when we went there. We really didn't know what it was when we left there. But through the years, we see how special that first event was.
Murray was still a force to be reckoned with in professional angling, one of the finest professional fishermen that the sport has ever produced, even today.
Tremendous angler. He's his brother, his twin brother named Billy. Both of them, I can't tell one apart. I guess his mother can, but I sure can't.
I was one of the very few people that could tell them apart. I don't know that I could do that today.
People get Billy and I mixed up now. Back when we were in college, we were really close.
Bobby was one of the few fishermen back in those days, I think, with a formal education. When he started bass fishing, I think he had his teaching degree.
When we went to college, we were ball players. We were football players. Not very big guys.
Always had aspirations of sometime trying to make it to a big college playing football, but too small and too slow to get up there with those guys. And still, they broke my collarbone first day of practice in college.
Loved to play ball and fish. That was kind of our deal. And every day we had classes. Our classes were over every day by noon. So during football season, we played ball, but when it wasn't football season, we were on the lake every day.
Bobby was a guy that I had followed his career from the first classic on, and Bobby was an interesting person because regardless of whether you were fishing with light line and spinning tackle in crystal clear water or muddy water and flipping or heavy line or whatever application, whatever you needed to do, Bobby always caught fish.
After he won the Classic, he took a couple of years off, and I think he kind of went into the rep business.
I became a sales manager for Cordell Bait Company in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Cotton had told me that I'd won a Classic, I'd done everything, and, you know, I needed to worry about making a living.
It was hard to make a living fishing because there wasn't enough money there. Sponsors was about the only way you could really make it.
You've got to want it, you know, and at the time when I backed out of the events, you know, there was not enough money in it to do like the guys do today that can make a living out of that and promotions and working for the factories. I really wanted to see if I could make it, you know, in the sales business of the industry. Fishing to us has always been a love and a stepping stone to something else.
Bobby then went to work for Hydro Sports Boats.
Joe Reeves hired me to come over to be vice president of Hydro Sport Boat Company, and Joe had just the opposite philosophy. He said, we're selling boats, we need a presence at the tournaments, and I want you to make sure you're at each and every event.
Most people, when they leave, they don't come back. But he came back and done well.
I kind of got the fire back in my belly. I said, if we're going to go out there, we're going to go out there to do one thing, and we're going to win.
So he goes back and he picks up right where he left off. A lot of guys can do that. Bobby Murray can. And boy, I'm telling you, you've never seen such a ferocious strike in your life. This fish just grabbed that spoon, water went everywhere, it sounded like he's flushing the commode.
I mean, he came up with a fantastic amount of fish the first day. And then the second day, hell, he couldn't even, I don't think he could stand in the boat.
Ross Barnett was different from pretty much any body of water that I've ever fished before. The river and the lake itself were quite a bit different. The lake had a lot of flooded timber flats. And the whole upper end of the lake was basically lily pads. I mean, the whole river channel and all the creeks and tributaries were just loaded with lily pads.
Anytime I went out of state and could see some lily pads, I had to go fishing around those because that's just your picturesque picture where a bass should be.
Even as far back as 1978, anglers had realized the importance of vegetation of any type, and certainly lily pads dominated large areas of the lake.
In my earlier fishing career, you know, I was never confronted with a situation where everything was exactly alike. I mean, just miles and miles and miles of lily pads, you know. How do you pick out these lily pads over those lily pads? Which ones are better?
Every cast looks like it's going to produce a bass. And the cover is real thick, and these lily pads lay on the surface. And it takes a different type of presentation to catch fish out of lily pads.
Well, I think the reason we're missing so many fish out here in these pads and moss and stuff is probably because the fish are not really getting a good look at the bait. The pads are so thick where the fish are hiding out that we're having to throw the bait right up on top of them and just kind of crawl it across them and let it drop into the little openings in between pads. And for this reason, the fish is not getting a good look at the lure, and he's hearing it and coming from underneath, coming up through the pads after it. And in lots of instances, he's missing the bait entirely.
I remember Tommy catching one in that tournament too, that he come in telling this story about seeing this bass swimming around with his eyeballs above the water.
We were looking around out in the pads, and I was looking for another place to throw, and I looked over and I saw something that looked like a muskrat or something moving through the pads. And I got to looking at it, you know, and I said, you know, that's a big old bass. He was just looking for food. This fish was coming up and looking around in the pads. He'd go under the water, he'd come up again. So I made a long cast way past the fish down in the pads where it didn't make a loud splash, and I started bringing the lure back. And boy, I'm telling you, you've never seen such a ferocious strike in your life. This fish just grabbed that spoon, water went everywhere, it sounded like he's flushing the commode. It was a big old fish that weighed about 6'14" or 6'15". It wasn't quite 7 pounds, and he had one bad eye, and I caught him. And I thought it was a weird deal. I still think it's a pretty weird deal, really, to be able to catch that fish. And I told the story that night, and I'll tell you, out of all the people that were present at the 78 Clyde, I doubt half of them believed it.
Any bass fisherman, you have to remember, is a lure designer. He'll tell you he is. You know, he's always tweaking his baits, working on lures, trying to find a better mousetrap to make something work.
Bobby Murray did reveal early on in the Classic that he was fishing a different type of lure.
This thing's got a little blade right in front of it that holds the lure really just right underneath the surface of the water, so when these fish rush at it, they don't knock the bait away before they can get their mouth on it.
Bobby just took an old Hildebrand spinner and put it on the front of a Johnson Silver Minnow and kind of made his own bait.
I could throw that spoon out there, I could get a hit on it, but I couldn't get the hook set, and just as luck would have it, you know, I'm just literally digging through a tackle box, and boom, there's a Snagless Sally, got that big old Hildebrand spinner right on the front end of it. I said, well, this will work, you know. I just popped it off, put it on there with a big split ring, and about 4 casts later, one hit it, and boom, I set the hook on him and I landed him.
Murray's bait, the spoon with the inline spinner in front of it, really was not Bobby's own idea. He just simply took advantage of it in the right conditions. As the story goes, Ricky Green had developed this bait.
Murray kind of made it famous, but I'm really the one that got it created. And Tommy Martin, I showed him, and I'm sure I showed David Owens.
That was a relatively new idea at that time. I mean, that was one of the baits that was pioneered in tournament fishing.
And a guy by the name of David Owens actually put Bobby on the pattern and the lure. Told Bobby what he was catching him on.
I just told him what I caught him on. Bobby's smart enough to go catch him. So that's, you know, that's the whole deal right there. Bobby was an excellent fisherman. He didn't need my help. He was a lot better than I was.
All those Arkansas boys, they had these particular baits, and like I said, they were sharing information amongst themselves, that's fine to do. But we other boys didn't have those secret lures, and there was a situation there with the grass, the lily pads and everything. That was the perfect lure, apparently.
Well, Lake's tailor-made for that bait, tailor-made for that spoon deal. So some of us knew about it, but there was a lot of contenders fishing the Classic, I promise you, in '78 that didn't know about that bait.
David Owens of Arkansas. $16-2. Dead Arkansas boy. That's all right. Go for it. You leader.
David had it won. I mean, he came up with a fantastic amount of fish the first day.
And I just got lucky. Found a few fish, and that's about the whole deal it was.
That night he got all smashed face, and then the second day, hell, he couldn't even, I don't think he could stand in the boat.
He was your leader yesterday. Now you had a blow up today with only one bass. 3 pounds, 4 ounces for David Owens.
I probably drank a little too much the night before, but that had no bearing on what I did the next 2 days. But then, you know, you got to catch them 3 days.
Somebody was in there fishing, and Bobby begged and pleaded and may have offered him some lures or something to please let me have this place.
I knew I had to catch a big one because I still had put myself in such a huge hole the first day that I had to catch a big strain.
Rick CLUNN had the confidence in the one he was fishing. Bobby had the confidence in the one he was fishing. And more than likely, if you'd have had to give the spinner to Rick and take the spinner away from Bobby, it would have messed their confidence up.